This is the video tutorial for Kit 3 Theme A. This theme is about revisiting basic suffixing patterns, and it is quite a review if you have been using real spelling for quite a long time. However, there are merits to this theme because it does delve into those very important concepts that we're trying to ensure our students have. First of all, the big ideas of this theme are that understanding the processes and patterns of suffixing are fundamental skills for even the earliest of writers. Recognizing suffixes of written words allows us to perceive their bases, a fundamental concept of reading. Back when we were doing this work as a lunch and learn, we often saw that there were benefits to real spelling that we could extract when instructing students in our writing workshop and in our reading workshop. This theme and the emphasis on suffixing really emphasizes that and reminds us how important it is for our literacy program as a whole. It's a lot more than just spelling. This theme revisits basic patterns, including the meaning of the term suffix, the status of the suffix as a bound element in word construction, the vocalic suffixes that can force changes to the letter immediately preceding, the patterns that govern the replacement of a final single non-syllabic E with a suffix, the effect of suffixing on an immediately preceding Y. Grade 3 will launch next year with this theme. They're currently sort of mid-year with it. Grades 4 and 5 might want to do so as well because it presents such a comprehensive review. That said, this theme could be used at any time if you feel like your students need a refresher on suffixing. To prepare for this theme, you want to review how to identify a base and the affixes by isolating the base element. One way to do this would be to start with some oral practice and the spelling out that we've been taught how to do from Pete and Melvin. That spelling out is so important because as an assessment tool, because you can really tell where students are thinking morphologic boundaries exists based on the pauses that they make. So the words here, careless, unkindness, heater, missing, yellowish, and mistake, can be used for oral practice. There is a paper on the server which could be printed out and used for written practice. And that written practice would include students breaking morphological boundaries using the word sum idea. This is a great place for you to practice and to see where your students are, sort of as a formative assessment, to see where they are with this idea of understanding bases and suffixes and how they attach. If you would find that your students are very adept at this, then potentially this theme isn't one that you would need to spend a lot of time on. First of all, and this information may be more appropriate for teachers in the preparing for the theme portion than it is for kids, but just making sure that you understand what the word suffix really means. Suffix is a term used to describe how we fix a suffix to a base element, as in it attaches. A base element may not be a word on its own, so a suffix belongs to and affixes to a base to change that word and to make it into a new word. Suffixes belong to a class called affixes, which include both prefixes and suffixes. And of course, you affix a prefix to the front of a word as well. In theory, there is no limit to the number of suffixes in a spelling, which is why we must want to be very careful that we don't call suffixes endings, because you can have another suffix added quite often. And that's where the matrices that Melvin has created are so visually important, because you can see as you work through the matrix from left to right how you can add on different suffixes. Suffixes are bound, meaning that they must attach to a base to have a place. We show this by writing suffixes with a hyphen preceding the suffix. It indicates that something has to be attached. There's something called a productive suffix, which forms new words. There are some suffixes that are added on that don't actually create a whole new word, but they change its class. Productive suffixes we've talked about in a previous theme. Vowel and consonant suffixes, of course, are very different, and it's one of the things that we want to concentrate on. It's the first question, really, that students should ask themselves before they think about what will happen to the base when attaching a suffix. An initial vowel letter suffix often is called vocalic because it forces a change to the letter that immediately precedes it in a spelling. This happens, and we'll study the flow chart for this, but that doesn't happen with a consonant letter suffix. So when a suffix starts with a consonant letter, like ly, the word that it's being attached to, the base, often doesn't have any changes to its structure. So very important for students to get that as something that they're thinking about before they add a suffix, is to consider, is it a vowel or is it a consonant? The suffix y is a little bit tricky in that it sometimes is considered a vowel and sometimes it isn't. And we know that from our use of the A, E, I, O, U, and sometimes Y study. The first question again is the suffix a vowel letter? And if our answer is that it's a Y and so it's sometimes a suffix, we have to get past sometimes and really sort of study the suffix itself. We know from previous studies in real spelling that every syllable must have at least one vowel letter. When you add a Y, it creates another syllable. Therefore, the Y is vocalic and can force changes because it's acting as a vowel. So by forcing changes, of course, we're talking about dropping a single silent E or potentially doubling a consonant. We move into that throughout this theme. The single non-syllabic E, for a vocalic suffix to replace an E, it must be both single and silent. The only occurrence of double E in spelling is the digraph E. This is important to note because sometimes kids get hung up on this, but they really need to ask themselves if the C is doing a job or if it's a placeholder and therefore would be single and silent. There is a big suffix checker which we've used before and is on the server. This is great to have on hand as a spelling tool that kids can use to really think about what they're doing. Often in Melvin's themes, what we see when you see flowcharts are pieces and parts of this big suffix checker. He's isolated the part that we're studying. So throughout this theme, you'll see some isolated flowcharts, but the big flowchart is interesting to kids, and it really pushes them to think through lots of potential shifts and changes as they're attaching suffixes. So getting into the main theme, in this theme we revisit the effect of suffixing on the single final non-syllabic E, doubling final consonant letters before a suffix, and when we're adding a final Y to a base or stem. A suffix can only affect the last letter of a base or stem to which it is added. And this is important for kids because sometimes they'll get thinking to make a change and they might see an E, but it's not the final letter of a base, and they try to make it to change it. They lop it off or do something to it. So that's important to just remind them that it's only that last letter that can have anything happen. So starting off, you want to work with kids on replacing seems to be the most straightforward spelling pattern, replacing a final single non-syllabic E with a suffix. There are words that you can practice with, and there's also a mini flowchart that kids can work with. This would be good for students that are new to real spelling or just to give a really good review. Of course, you can also do spelling out once the words are complete, just to make sure that they have that orally. It's such a great indicator of where they're seeing and hearing, and then can spell with morphologic boundaries intact. Doubling the final consonant letters before doubling the final consonant letter of a monosyllabic base, meaning one syllable, these criteria must be met. The suffix has an initial vowel letter, so the suffix has to have a vowel in there. There is only one consonant letter, and that there is only just one vowel letter immediately before that final consonant letter. We've studied this when we looked at doubling the final consonants before, but again, this is that thing that kids and adults like me often forget some of the basics and they wonder, do I double it? Do I not double it? This is a quick way, if you can get this idea in your head, of making sure that you ask yourself some questions before you willy-nilly double or don't. There are words to practice with consonant doubling. Melvin gave us several, and there's also you'd put some other words that are already into a word sum idea, and then you'd use a flow chart he's provided in order to check yourself after doing some of the work. Ask and looking at, is there a vowel and then a consonant, and what happens with that. We know this from a previous theme, Kit 2 Theme H, but it's good to remember neither X or W ever doubles. QU does double because the U is a semi-vowel. I'm not sure I wrote that right. I'm going to have to check on that. That seems odd to me that we would have two U's. I think I meant don't because W would still be W. So in this I may have made a mistake and I need don't. The effect of suffixing on a previous final letter Y. A base or stem with a final Y will change that Y to I before the suffix, except when the Y is part of a vowel digraph or when we're avoiding writing two I's. There's some practice here that you can use, and again, a mini flow chart. All of this work and practicing will help kids integrate and ask themselves questions before they just decide to do something when they're spelling.